Hello and good morning. I want to talk about God. What else is there to talk about, really? And I want to read a Bible passage, Bible chapter, a psalm um, that I found really helpful. I've been dealing with attack, enemies. Let me pause this for a second. It looks a little bit clearer. And one thing I like about the Psalms is how human they are. Hang on. How human they are in the sense that they're not trying to be overly spiritually correct, overly pious. David or whichever, Aleph, or I don't remember. They're all attributed to, maybe Solomon. But anyways, we'll just say David. That the voice that comes through is plaintive, pleading, angry, frustrated, dualistic, sorrowful, desperate. It sounds a lot like many of us, right? Human in that sense. It's like he's just letting it rip before God, And even, I said dualistic, even some of the framing in some of these Psalms where he talks about his enemies, often free me from my enemies, these people who are attacking me. There's a little bit of a shadow to a lot of the non-dual stuff, and I guess I kind of want to flag that because non-duality is the way that people in Christian circles, to the extent that they have any concept of it, talk about non-duality, tends to fall into one category, and there's at least two ways to talk about it. And the way that is not usually mentioned is the deeper dimension of what that term points to. But this is, I guess, the more superficial way of understanding that term and how it gets used by certain people in other traditional or in other spiritual approaches, but that there's no good or bad. There's that Rumi quote, beyond good and bad, there's a field, you'll find me there, out beyond good and bad. And to be sure there's some biblical reference point for some of this. I mean, my Father's rain falls on the just and the unjust. He makes his sun to shine upon the good and the evil, something like that. Doesn't have to be interpreted that way, but there's this idea that there is no, here's Shakespeare, just running the gamut of references here. There is no good or bad, no good or evil, only thought that makes it so. Or that, it's all God. And at a slightly more psychologically, emotionally sophisticated level, you can say, Christ on the cross, forgive them, Father, they know not what they do. Christ isn't saying there, forgive them, these are evil people. No, Christ, it seems implicit in that statement, is pointing out their confusion, their unconsciousness, that there's innocence there, but they're just lost. They're confused. Forgive them. They are forgivable because of how lost they are in this world. I think that's a little bit of a deeper insight into a kind of non-dual approach. But that there's this divinity that gets covered up. Anyways, let me not let me stop there before I go further down that rant. But it's like there's a tendency, a shadow side in some of that non-dual perspective. Again, non-duality itself is an experiential insight, a recognition of the oneness, the seamlessness, the boundarylessness, the partitionlessness of reality, one without a second, of ultimate reality, of the ground of being, of consciousness, of spirit, of God's self, God's being. And that's an experiential insight. That's not a conceptual framework. What I was describing previously is kind of a concept map, or a way of viewing reality, I guess, in a sense. But so there's a deeper dimension that I think is the more significant and important dimension to non-duality. But there is this notion that, and it's a shadow side to a lot of this, especially to the more superficial approach to non-duality, that we too easily lose all distinctions in the rush to say that everything is one. We fail to make clear dualistic distinctions, clear judgments, clear discernments in a way that is just not healthy. We try to flatten out reality conceptually, or as a kind of a certain mood that we're making, a certain perspective that we're kind of filtering reality through. And David is not that. And it's refreshing because it's human and it's just honest. He's very dualistic. He's got enemies. He's not saying, no, these are God. This is God showing up in another form, and it's all one. And no, he's saying, protect me from these fucking idiots. Protect me from these people who are attacking me. He's not saying, oh, they're just psychologically wounded or confused. Even if there's some truth to that. No, he's given vent to his just honest feelings, and that is healthy and helpful on a certain level, and I like that. Now, are there shadows there too? Yes, there are. But I'm, again, way off topic here, because I've been dealing with enemies. Can I use that language? Can I allow myself to use that language? I guess what's a little bit truer for me is to say I've been dealing with somebody who's been attacking me, somebody who is being ugly towards me. And you don't have to love that. You don't have to accept that. Now, there is a place also for letting certain things go, and that there is an insight that resonates with everything I just kind of described, of recognizing how lost somebody is, and there's a freedom in recognizing that. And that's a great insight too, recognizing it's not personal. Wow, this is just how this person is. They move through life that way. And sometimes that can be helpful and useful, and you can let something go and not personalize it, and just kind of moves past you. I've had that experience too. But when there's a pattern, when it's directed at you, when it's just ugly, you don't have to spiritualize that. You can be like David in a sense, and characterize that as wrong at a minimum. And you don't have to tolerate it. You don't have to put up with it. You don't have to like it. You don't even really have to understand it or show compassion towards it. At a certain point, you have to be compassionate towards yourself, and so, anyways, and one thing I greatly struggle with, and I found out there's a term for this, looking into it because I was really struggling with it. It's called the spirit of the stairs. It's in French, though, l'esprit de l'escalier. Forgive my French there. Pardon my French. And I read, though I'm not totally perfectly remembering it now, but I think it's the idea. Well, here's what the phenomena is, and then let me see if I can kind of describe why it's called that. But it's the idea that after the moment has passed in a confrontation or in an interaction, 5 minutes later, 10 minutes later, an hour later, when your body settles, your mind settles, then you realize, shit, this is what I should have said. Fuck, why didn't I say that? Now the moment has passed. And there can be a whole, what is it, self-recrimination? No, a whole self-condemnation. Can't think of the right word here. Just a feeling of frustration and a little bit of, I guess, self-condemnation. Like, damn it, why couldn't? Thank you now that you're giving me this perfect response. Where were you when I needed you? 5 minutes ago, an hour ago, whatever. And now the moment has passed. And I really struggle with that. Not so much when it's a positive interaction, maybe a little bit there too, but when people are just passive aggressive or hostile unnecessarily out of the blue, rude, unkind, ugly, it's like my nervous system goes a little bit haywire and I just can't think straight. It somehow it tends to catch me off guard after all these years living in this world, knowing we're not living in Candyland, and we're not living in heaven, or we're not living in paradise, knowing what this world is, and it's still. I think part of it is because I sort of choose not to go through the world on guard and hypervigilant and ready to clap back and ready to Aikido and jujitsu everything that comes my way. I've gone through periods of doing that, and I think there was some growth and something healthy there. But it's exhausting, and it's exhausting. It's not peace. It requires holding a shape, holding a posture. And so I tend to move through the world, I guess, sort of undefended in a certain way, not looking for trouble, and in a sense, actively doing what I can to avoid trouble. And there is a way without being overly guarded that you can just kind of navigate the waters of life, and you recognize on the periphery, oh, that's not a good person to talk to be around. Oh, that situation doesn't look like a supportive situation, and that can mitigate many, 85% of stuff that people get entangled in. It's just that kind of awareness and, I guess, preventative, or I don't know, I can't think of the right word, but just not getting involved in stuff, going around the rapids. But life always finds a way to fuck with you, if you notice that. And but yeah, so I get attacked on some level, and my reaction, I just can't think straight sometimes. It's like I guess a freeze reaction on some level. Or just, my nervous system just dysregulates. It really bothers me. And then once things semi-regulate, 5-10 minutes later, an hour later, then the thought comes, this is what you should have said, you idiot. Why didn't you fucking say it? And then you get kind of beat up, and the inner critic brutalizes you, and then you're like, shit, do I go back now, and do I do this? Can I let this go? And It's brutal, more so than I can say in words for me, especially because I've got certain challenges with my nervous system and OCD and these other things. It can just be a total nightmare. Um, it's called the spirit of the stairs, I think, because it's the idea of, at the top in your office or something, you have an interaction, don't think of things, and then halfway down the stairs, at the bottom of the stairs, then you realize what you should have said. I think that's the idea. Or you're in your apartment, in the hallway, outside your apartment, have an interaction, and then by the time you get to the bottom of the stairs, you realize. Anyways, l'espionner de l'escalier. Um, so yeah, I had this dust up with this guy at work. Kind of a longer story, but went sideways, and I tried to talk to him best as I could, skillfully as I can. And actually, it was kind of predicated on one of these spirit of the stairs incidences, because he had kind of popped off a little bit at me or snapped at me a little bit, and again, I didn't have a good response. And a few days went by, and I wasn't able to clear it, and so I just thought, well, let me just try to talk it out. And that didn't go too well. I've gotten better in these conversations about holding my ground, and I knew going into it. Here's another thing where your intuition interfaces with your psychology and with the reality on the ground, and it gets messy because I knew going into it, it probably would go sideways. I didn't get the sense that this was a very mature person. He's my age probably, or maybe a little bit younger. It's not like he's a young person, but I just got the sense that, anyways, yeah, I had the sense that it probably would not be constructive. And to be fair, I don't always approach it totally constructively, but I did try, and my read on the situation was right. There's this passive aggressiveness that is really, man, that's such a hard energy to interface with, because it's like subterfuge. The language that's being lobbed at you is usually not great, but it's usually kind of a camouflage or subtext. There's a subtext there for an energetic jab that's getting at you, and it's cowardly, and it's couched in a way that it's really hard to. You can't really engage with it in a one-to-one type of way. It's like a knife being thrust at you with a smile on the person's face. It's kind of like that, something like that. But I've gotten better in these not being too literal in the conversations, and just trusting the energy and being strong, and there's a ferocity that shows up. Anyways, we had this conversation. He gets upset. He walks away mid-conversation. He actually escalates right away when I tried to share what was going on for me. He just instantly popped off, and I called it right then and there, and that was good. That was a good response on my. See, in the context of having a frictive, difficult conversation, then I can be fierce, I can be present, because it's like I've approached it, and there's a table set there, and there's an intention there. But it's just when somebody out of nowhere, out of the blue, something where I'm not doing anything to generate, a negative interaction, or I don't have that, I'm just going through my day, and somebody just dumps their shit, or just being a jerk, whatever. That's when it's really disorienting for me, and hard for me to catch my footing. But when I go into an interaction, or when I'm in the right mindset, then there's a presence there and a ferocity. I still hate doing it. I hate confrontation, but I'm just trying to bracket all this and isolate specific parameters of what's challenging here. But so yeah, he gets mad, walks away mid-conversation. That's fine. For me at that point, I've tried something courageous. I've tried to talk to somebody. They chose to walk away. Um, I'm okay with letting that go. I don't chase them down. I don't feel like I have to finish the conversation. I just say, you know what? Let's leave it at that. You know, I feel basically intact. I didn't denigrate myself. Um, I didn't do it perfectly, but you know what? I tried. Later in that shift, the guy comes and attacks me on the out on the floor. He comes at me pointing his finger. Hey, I need to talk to you, and just instantly goes off. He's just attacking verbally, energetically. And I see it coming. You know, there's a transparency to this guy that, again, my intuition kind of picked up beforehand. And so when he comes at me full steam, you know, trying to resolve what he walked away from before, um, there's a presence there, and I talked back, held strong, stood in the face of it, and didn't take that stuff on board. But he's cussing me out at one point, telling me to fuck off. All the mouths at me, fuck off, because we're out on the floor, and just all this stuff. And again, he tries to do like this hit and run attack. I'm standing there and I'm saying, hey, is this going to be a two-way conversation? Can I talk to you? Do I get a response, or is this going to be, you know, so I'm talking back and being firm. But at that point, it's such an escalation in the hostilities, and I don't want to just have this. I just want to work, basically. I want to work and not deal with this kind of crap. I tried to resolve it. It wasn't happening, so I report the incident. Would rather have not done that, tried to mediate or rectify, remediate, I don't know what the right word is, other ways, and didn't happen. And there's this escalation. And so I reported it. Now, in the following days, there's just initially a kind of tepidness, or seems like something useful has happened in setting a boundary with this guy. But before too long, he's back to just being petty and just doing, you know, all these little passive aggressive, petty, ugly things. Intentional, just bullshit. And again, for me, these things are, especially when it's not in the context of a direct conversation, I don't know, it's not something I feel good about. In fact, if anything, I feel ashamed about it. I don't like this. But I realize the shame and everything, that's another layer that makes it harder, and it's not really helpful. So I'm working on just kind of just saying that's just how it is for me. I've got this nervous system. That is the way it is. I react the way I react. I'm working on it, but I'm not going to put pressure on myself and beat myself up about how I react. I am to some extent, but I'm working on letting some of that go, because I think that's a good initial step. Because, yeah, I wish I would react differently. I wish I'd have the perfect clap back, or at least say something in these scenarios. Say something to interrupt, to break that cycle. Now, the cycle perpetuates if all you have is if you fight fire with fire, and that's part of what's nuanced here, and what I'm trying to bracket and delineate and describe here. Because if you just jump into the anger or the ugliness, that erodes, that corrupts, that harms you in the doing of it. That's not peace. That's not transmutation. That's not transformation. That's not true strength. Running from it, also not true strength. But there's a different thing. There's a transformative dimension, which is standing strong and speaking into it in a way that is clear, burns, and there's not a lot of blowback. It's like a cleaner cut. It's a cleaner burn. And let me get to that in a second. I've described this in other videos, but yeah, so there's a few incidences of this guy just doing BS. And I didn't say anything, and found that frustrating. I mean, in one sense, you could say there's restraint there, but I would much rather have said something. And that's super frustrating, and that really bothers me. And the whole thing was really starting to bother me. And so I prayed, and I said, God, help me, speak through me, loose my tongue, help me in these situations. I'm really struggling here. Just let something come out of my mouth that marks, that says, hey, I'm here, stop fucking with me, stop being a dick. And so I actually sought help. I saw a few therapists, talked to a few people, and did research. That's where I found out about this spirit of the stairs. And that was helpful too, to know that it is kind of a common thing. Normalizes it a little bit. But I had to reflect on it and figure out, what is that connected way of responding for me that doesn't, in a way, it's more about my response than his actions, which I cannot control. But what is that connected, authentic, aligned thing for me to say or do in that moment? And I did find some simple language for that. Probably going to cut this video here in a minute and do a part 2. I could leave it as a cliffhanger right there. But no, I'll just say it. And maybe this would be useful to somebody. You know, for me, what felt true in a way that doesn't de-escalate, or that doesn't escalate hostilities, but in a way transforms it, at least sets a boundary for me, is to say, hey, blank, I won't say the person's name, stop being ugly to me. Be kind. You know, and with that kind of energy, that kind of flavor, that kind of steadiness. Doesn't profane my spirit, doesn't degrade my spirit, and says something authentic and true. Calls out the situation. Simple also. So that's the thing, one of the things that you realize, especially in a situation like where I've been working, where it's a lot of rough characters with not great communication skills, and just the prevailing ethos, kind of this brutalist, not exactly dog eat dog, and again, there are worse situations to be in for sure, but the idea of having an adult conversation is not really possible for most people, unfortunately, clearing the air in that way. So you have to figure out other ways to interface that are authentic and aligned, that don't have you falling into the trance and under the spell and into the confusion, but that communicate in a clear way. And so that's part, and so being simple and direct is part of what's called for. So I had that thought and that realization that would be something useful for me. God, help me, give me and part of what. So actually, you know what? Let me pause it there. I'm gonna do a part 2 for semi brevity with these videos.